So while we've fixed that critical issue of making sure that other objects aren't entering the trigger zone and setting off our ability to pick up the item, there is something else I don't quite like. Okay, so we have the object there. And what if I turn to face the other way? Let me just pause it and highlight the player and zoom in so you can watch the transform forward of the player there. Okay, so you can see that Z handle. And as we look away, I'm looking directly or completely in the opposite direction. I press the E and I've still picked up the item. Now you might want that behavior. You might want it so even if you're within the region of the item, you can still pick it up. If so, you can just leave it like that. For me personally, I think that it's a matter of discovery. It's not just a matter of luck and seeing this press E coming up on the screen if you hit a trigger volume. If you haven't actually seen the item, I only want that to come up when the item is visible to the player. So let's work on that. Okay, we're going to have to rearrange some things here a little bit first. So I'm going to do what I've done in previous videos. I'm just going to copy that and call it update old. So this is a function that's not being called, but I've got a reference of all my code there, just in case I muck up this, then I can just bring that back and start again. So first of all, I'm going to check if in the trigger zone. Then we need to bring back that if input, because at some stage we are still going to be pressing the E and we're going to want to pick the item up. Let's just push all that in there. So all I've done currently, if you look, oops, after I fix my syntax, all I've done is split this if conditional check into two parts. So instead of checking if both parts are true, I'm checking the trigger zone first, and then I'm going to check for the E. Before we check for the E, I want to set up a function that looks after the dot product. Okay, I'm going to compare the player's transform forward directional vector compared to the local directional vector of the item to be picked up compared to the player. So I need to write a function for that. So it's going to be check if item is visible. That's what we're going to be doing. So let's create a boolean so that when we've calculated that, we will know the true or false if that is visible. This is something that only this script is going to use, so I guess I can make this private. Is item visible? It's going to be a boolean, and I'm going to set it as default for false. Okay, now we have the boolean. Now we can check if we're pushing the get key down and the item is visible. Only then will we go through and give ourselves the option to pick it up or not. And at the same time, now that's the update old. Going to the on GUI. Okay. If in trigger zone, then we check if we have an item and also here we're going to check if the item is visible. Okay, so that should be all the setup done. I need to check that after we build this function to see if it's going to break or not. Now, dot product. Done a whole video on that, so I can fly through this. So we want to get the item directional vector as a vector 3, and that is going to equal. So we have the trigger script, trigger item. That's going to be a null if we don't check for that first. So we need to do this check even down here. So in trigger zone, so we have a reference to the script, so we can check if the trigger script has the trigger item. So in the trigger zone, check if visible. Before we do any dot products, we need to check if there isn't actually an item that we can get our directional vector from. So if, and then else, just clean this up now, else is item visible will be false because there's no item anyway. Okay, so back to this. So the item directional vector is going to be the trigger script, trigger item, and that item is a game object. Let's just check that. Trigger item, game object. So the trigger item, we need the transform dot position. Okay, and to make it a local directional vector in relation to this player here, we're going to use our transform forward. Now, I haven't used my transform anywhere yet, so I haven't cached it. So let's create a private variable to store my transform. Let's get type transform. And at the start, when we initialize, we're going to say my transform equals transform. So there we are. We stored a reference to the component on this script. Now we can use it down here. So my transform dot we're calculating a directional vector. So it's the trigger item, the item we're picking up, its position minus our position. Okay, and for dot product, we need a normalized vector, normalized directional vector. Normalize that. And then we're going to calculate the dot product. Variable dot product. Type float is going to equal the vector 3 dot, and we're going to compare the item's directional vector to my transform forward directional vector. Okay, so that's going to return a float. Now again, going back to my dot product video, I found that 0.8 was a decent number to compare against to confirm that something was visible on the screen. So we're just going to use that hard-coded value of 0.8. So if if the dot product is greater than 0.8, then we can say the item is visible. And then just to turn things around, say else the item visible is false. So all that just to check if the item was visible. That's in there. So check if the item is visible. Check if we have an item. If we don't have an item, then it's false. If we do have an item, we do the dot product. Dot product returns greater than that. It's true, else it's false. Okay, so I'm happy there's nothing wrong there. So I can delete this old function here. Now I already set up the GUI, so let's just save that, check for compilation errors. Let's just run this to see if it's working as I want it to work. So we shouldn't even get the press E message if we're not facing it. So let's check that first. So press E. Okay. So I'm happy with that. That's exactly what I wanted. So if we're not facing, I press the E. Zoom in there so you can see. Okay, so I'm not facing the object, I'm hitting the E, nothing's happening. So even if it's slightly on the screen, I have the message, I hit the E, and we've collected the item like normal. If I keep counting the E, there's nothing there to be visible. So is visible is false. So we don't even have this part working now, because we're only ever going to fall into here if the item is visible. And the item's not going to be visible if it doesn't exist. So that's actually redundant. I'm just going to comment it out. Okay. Checking everything one more time. There's another object going into the collider, out into the trigger volume and out of the trigger volume. That didn't set it off. We walk into the trigger volume. We have the press E message. We're not looking at the item. We don't have the press E message. We don't have the press E message. We're not looking at the item. Press E, nothing happens. Looking at it, press E. Press E again, nothing's happening, but it's not breaking. There we have it. That's just my personal preference. As I said, if you don't want the option of looking at the object, I've now shown both ways to do it. At first, we didn't have to be looking at the object, and then in that instance, I set it so we do have to be looking at the object. And this is a final note. That 0.8 is a little bit too thin, like you can see the object and that's not happening. Just drop that down. Experiment. Drop down to 0.75. Save it. Because I'm working in a 4:3 aspect ratio here, more than likely working in 16:9. Let's just see. There we go. See, that's even a better value for me, 0.75. So if you're on 16:9, you might even want to drop it down to 0.72, 0.7. But that's exactly what I want. Just a little bit showing, hit the E, collect the item. All done. See you on the next video.